thanks for making the time. And I think it was your idea, Avellina. You thought it would be a good idea just to have a chat around
I think
those issues.
Ian originally suggested it, and then I concurred.
Yeah.
So he was the illumination.
Yeah,
I basked in the light.
I think one of us came up with the idea at about the time of September. It was the 10th. It was the 11th anniversary, but it was an anniversary.
Mm-hmm.
So we're a couple of months late.
Good. Well, it just made me wonder, actually, and we can just... I first met you, Avellina, online.
Mm-hmm.
And you actually have the privilege of being the very first person that ever interviewed me on this particular matter. And it was, we had started we officially started A Force for Good on the 21st of March, 2012, about 4 or 5 weeks after David Cameron had announced the idea of the referendum.
Mm-hmm.
And the mainstream media, however, just completely ignored all the grassroots groups. And the mainstream media would only talk to Better Together, which was the pro-UK group.
Right.
And
Alistair Darling and his...
Yeah. And so the only people who would interview the grassroots types were the fledgling social media community, which I say fledgling at that time because this is 2012, and there's the concept of podcasting and publishing on X and all that sort of stuff hadn't really caught on, to be frank. I mean, there was virtually none of that back then. There was only a few people.
There was lots of Twitter, but it was kind of secondary still.
Yeah, secondary. Absolutely. And so there were fewer people to take an interest, as it were. But you took an interest and you were the first. And you weren't even from Scotland. You weren't even in Britain. You were in Maryland. So, thank you for that. In fact, how did you hear about us then? I'll ask you firstly.
Sure. Well, first of all, you're most welcome. It was an honor and a privilege to interview you and all of the people I interviewed for Union Jack Chat. It was a very enlightening experience in a lot of ways. I wouldn't have, missed out on it for the world, really. But yeah, so how I found you particularly and how I got involved in the project generally was through Henry Hill and Paul Watterson, who ran Open Unionism. And it was their website that I originally wrote for. And the interview project was initially kind of a subset of that. And then sort of became, kind of semi-independent. So Henry Hill is the one who brought you to my attention, that you existed, that you're a force for good, outreach essentially existed, organization existed. And he was the one who suggested that I get in touch and try to interview you for the project. So that was how that occurred.
Fantastic. Well, I was looking at that interview yesterday in preparation for today, and we've got the link to it. So we'll fire that out on the Facebook and on the Twitter threads as well, just so people can check it out if they want. Because I remember what you did was you actually interviewed me by Skype.
I did.
But it was prior to kind of live streaming and stuff like that, really.
That was when I still had dial-up internet as well. So it was quite. I live out on a farm too, so the internet connection I remember being quite sketchy, and doing Facebook in general was difficult, and that was why Skype was easier to do than Facebook at the time, with regards to just the speed that it was able to
Absolutely,
generate.
it wouldn't have worked. So you actually transcribed the whole thing and put it
Yes.
out after 2 Skype interviews as well. Well, thanks for that. Ian, can you refresh my memory about how you and you've been a long-term supporter of A Force for Good, and I was conscious of you because I think you would send occasional emails, and I think you were on our email update list and things like that, but I never actually physically met you. Until when did I physically meet you?
Yes, that was in 2015. By the way, I'm in a thematically interesting location right now. I'm in Cambridge in the autumn. I've had a bit of a haircut disaster, which is why I'm wearing the bonnet. I tried to cut my hair in a hotel.
Now you are a true Scottish gentleman and scholar with that bonnet. Yes. All you need is a white cockade to really get into the biscuit tin mode all the way.
Anyway, yes. So I first reached out to Alistair and met him in person and began pinging memos to him in the middle of 2015. Now, I first met Alistair in person, I think it was June, July 2015, and it was during the George Square Armed Forces parade, where I actually just wandered there to see what's going on. And anyone who was there, I took some videos myself, but anyone who was there will remember an immense ocean of Union Jacks. It would not have been anything of the sort had it not been for Alistair. So I went there to the Armed Forces parade just because it was Saturday. Lovely, beautiful, beautiful sunny day. And there was Alistair McConnachie, who I remember from the videos, which we can also talk about. And he was going around distributing little Union Jack flags, like he was like the wee flag fairy, and I just saw these very and they go Union Jack to the crowd, and I thought, yeah, what we're seeing here is Alistair getting the easy things right for no money, changing the cosmetics of the whole occasion. It was a very prominent and memorable occasion because in among the crowd was Taylor Swift, just hanging out unescorted. Well, she had a boyfriend, like a tall fellow there, I think. But that was it. I mean, there was a band there, like there's music, like the British Army, the recruitment team. They have their little stage in the band. She had nothing to do with it. She was just chilling out among the general population, just 5 meters from us. Anyway, my point is, she was beset by Union Jacks, thanks to Alistair, you see. And what he was doing was he was changing the entire cosmetic of the entire event for a price of, I don't know, the price of 1,000 small flags, maybe 3 large ones, and that's it. And that's basically emblematic of the reason why I reached out to Alistair, because the Yes Scotland campaign that year and the previous year, 2014, they didn't really have an equal and opposite operator in Better Together. They were not. There was, it was as if Alistair was the equal and opposite force to the separatists, because it was the separatists. They knew when and where and how to populate an event with SNP flags or saltires or weird obscure flags. Our alleged allies, allegedly in power, they would forget to do that. They would forget to do the obvious thing. They would forget to do the easy thing. And that was basically the story. That had been the story in 2014 with things like the vow and all that stuff. And that was still that summer the story in 2015, where you had Ed Miliband basically forfeiting the entire Scottish part of the general election to the SNP by refusing to rule out a deal with the SNP. I don't know if we need to recapitulate the dynamic there, but it was basically I basically was drawn into Alistair's orbit because of the passivity of our allies in power and the refusal to do the easy thing, and it falls upon increasingly peripheral figures such as Alistair was to do the obvious thing.
Yeah, these are good points, and thanks for mentioning them. And it's, I mean, we have the phrase, you know, with a force for good, you get an awful lot of bang for your buck, basically. I mean, we have a small income, but we can really change the optics of an event and move things our way. And I'd like to think that a force for good, with the help of all of our colleagues, have been able to do that. It's a learning process from the time we started to just now, and one's learning all the time. But something that struck me when I saw that wee video that we played from Crowborough, of all the British flags on that. Now, a few years ago, people would have turned up and they would have just walked along, and there'd have been no colour. There might have been one or two people with you know, cardboard messages, as there quite rightly always is, but there'd have been no colour or anything like that. But you look at this event in this small rural English town, and it's all Union Jacks, St George flags, one or two other flags in there as well. People are beginning to see the power of raising the colours, as it were, to coin the name of the recent campaign that's been going around. So I think people have been starting now to see the value of that, and more people have been becoming politically educated on how to do activism properly and most effectively. And I think that's something that came out of the 2014 referendum. And let's just kind of head back to the start of that. And as I say, the referendum was announced in January 2012, and then there was silence. We, A Force for Good, we were the very first organisation of any kind to officially mobilise. And then there was one or two other groups like ourselves that operated largely through the internet. And then the Better Together movement eventually came along after the fact of us being there. But it was chosen to be on the 18th of September 2014. And everybody thought, and I don't know what you thought about this, Ian, but everybody thought that it would be won by us. But as it got closer to the referendum, it looked like it was going to be a toss-up. I mean, and panic started to set in. I don't know how you felt. Well, I'll ask Ian how you felt from here, and what Avellina felt like looking over from Maryland.
Well,
Ian.
Actually, we both would have had a similar perspective on the moment, because it was in late August, early September, that I actually was in America, right, on business. And firstly, what can I say about this? Right before I departed for America, late August, and you really have to, like, Scottish people really have to concentrate and think back to that, how it was that moment, right? Even as late as August 2014, support for separation, was still hovering around its 30-something% norm. You know, it was 30-something% in summer 2014. It was 30-something% in summer 2004, summer 1994, summer 1984. Right? It was hovering around its 30-something% norm right until August 2014. We forget that. Modern history is very easy to forget. So I departed to the United States. And what I found when I got to the United States was, first of all, Americans had only very, very recently been alerted to the fact that there was even a Scottish referendum. And the reason
Except for me.
Yeah. Except for one lady.
By the way, it's a bad sign when Hollywood can make an 18-year-old girl like from Maryland weep in her bedroom.
Yeah.
You know. Yeah, so I landed in the United States in August 2014, and what I find is that Americans have only very recently been alerted to the fact that there is a referendum. And then they start asking me questions about it, and I say, yeah, technically we've got this referendum in a month, but it's kind of a nothing because the polls haven't moved in like 100 years, and no needle has moved. So it's like just a formality, so nothing's going to happen, you know. And then apparently the reason it had come to American attention at all was because whilst I was in the air, or whilst I was in America, I just landed, you know, there'd been some spike in the polls or something, and things had shot up to 45%, 46, 47% or something like that. And there was like a 10+% leap and rising. And yeah, so like when I departed in August for America, it's like everyone was mocking the separation campaign because they'd got nowhere after 3 years or whatever. Then a couple of weeks in America, and it was like the polls were through the roof, and it was like something happened to make the polls shoot through the roof. And I contacted people back home, and apparently it was something to do with an interview that a debate, sorry, that Salmon had done with Alistair Darling, who was leading the Better Together. Apparently, it was about that time Alex Salmon did the whole fear, you chicken, you know, type speech, accusing Alistair Darling of fear-mongering. And apparently that, after all these years and decades, was the one thing that finally moved the needle, was Alex Salmon just using the word fear, fear, fear. So apparently these were the Scottish genes of Marty McFly or whatever, just reacting to being called chicken. It's like ridiculous. It's like
I guess that is like something traditionally Scots don't like to be called. So maybe that is some sort of ancient gene got sort of activated at that point, and it's like.
But it was just so singular. It was like everything had failed. He'd thrown the kitchen sink at it, and eventually he did this fear, blah blah blah, whatever. All this invidious duck speak about, oh, you're scared. I never watched the TV debates. I never watched any of it. I'm a moral coward in that regard. So I'll tell you something about. I
mean, I didn't either. I can't handle watching, frankly, those types of debates, especially when I'm invested in something. It just makes me far too stressed. So I don't.
Yeah.
That's a good way of putting it, actually. When you're invested in something, when you've got a strong opinion on something, you just do not want to look at people on a screen that you can't interject with.
Exactly. Exactly. You're helpless.
Yeah.
That's a weakness. That's a weakness for me, because my occupation is I'm a communications consultant for emerging technologies. So what that means is I am the first person in the room to notice when people are talking past each other. And I try to get different technological sectors to talk to each other, because they're blind to each other. So I'm a reconciler. So when I see people talking past each other, when I see fake division, when I see gratuitous fake division, manufactured grievance, manufactured whole cloth out of absolutely nothing, privilege represented as oppression and vice versa, and just the world turned upside down, I just see that as the devil's work. And I see it as like work for me. So my fear is that if I pay too much attention to this nonsense, that makes work for me, and I have to use my work talent, my work abilities to sort things out. But I was relying on the fact that it was slumping at 30% anyways. But now it shoots up to 48, and now I'm tortured because now it's the Scottish political, fishbowl.
Maybe it was something. Maybe it was something like when the Ravens leave the Tower of London, Britannia collapses. Well, Ian, you're like the Ravens, but for Scotland. When Ian leaves Scotland,
Exactly.
all of the the rug is pulled out from underneath Caledonia. So Ian, you can never leave again.
And if he hadn't come back, we would have lost the referendum.
There we go. See, he needed to fly back. Yeah, he need to clip his wings, keep that lad in his native land.
Yeah. Well, what then happened? You spoke about August. We got into September, and then the Sunday Times released a poll on the first week of September. This is like 2 weeks out, about 10 days or so out from the actual referendum, showing that the yes people were in the lead on 51%. This was the famous Sunday Times poll of the 7th of September 2014. And yes, we're in the lead. And for those of us invested, I mean, the shock is like, this is ridiculous. And for me as well, and like both of you as well, we think, or at least I used to think, that if it's a clever idea, if it's a sensible idea, people will see the value of that, and that should be good for at least 10% or something like that. Whereas, as you've just suggested to us, Ian, somebody just has to accuse you of being a fearty, and suddenly the whole debate is turned upside down.
Yeah, there's no possibility I just prefer the kingdom to be one piece. No, I have to have a psychological defect in order to want that.
Yeah, exactly. And so it was a lesson in how easily things can change, not because of good arguments, but just because of, well, the particular context, who's got the megaphone, who's got the extra money, who's
reminds me of a line.
Who's not.
Reminds me of a line actually from General Thomas Gage, from among my 18th century officers of interest, about democratic despotism, and really the idea that the democratic process has pros and cons, but it really is susceptible to its own deep-seated dysfunction and despotism when you get down to it. The despotism of groupthink, the despotism of manipulation, the despotism of all kinds of ways in which a crowd can be turned into kind of a thoughtless mob of people who, can easily become a majority of people doing something incredibly stupid. So this is why I always have been, I've always been critical of treating democracy as an unquantified universal good. I've always said, well, it has its pros, it has its cons. It is a system which can have good aspects to it, but it should never be treated as gospel, so to speak. It's something that is very, very susceptible to human error.
I would just say democracy is the proper alternative to civil war, and the best thing you can do, I think, is limit the jurisdiction, therefore limit the intensiveness of governance, therefore limit the scope for division, therefore limit the degree to which democracy is necessary. So basically, in limited jurisdictions, democracy is more comfortable because it's less totalizing. The questions being asked are less all-encompassing. Like this affected everything, of course. That's why it felt like a kind of political sleep deprivation, because I was constantly called upon to confront this mob of very sort of invidiously confused people, in order to keep the kingdom in one place, which is really in one piece.
Well, it's the kind of vote that, quite frankly, shouldn't have been happening. I think right off the bat, that was what was affecting us as well. It's like, how could this even be happening? That they're putting it up to like a general vote whether the country should dissolve or not. It just it seemed strange.
There's very little pretext for it, because the SNP did not come to power because of a crescendo of support for separation in 2011 or whatever. It was none. Like I said, it was 30%, 30%, 30% right until the last minute. The SNP came to power because people and voters, Hollywood voters, were bored with the Labour Party by 2011, wherever it was, right? Or 2007, 2011. And it was from the vantage point of the SNP being in Hollywood that they then made the rules, and they then forced the question to the surface as if there had been a crescendo of support for separation. So as the SNP get into Hollywood, they say, right, well, we've ridden this wave of support for separation, therefore we must have our separation referendum, which wasn't true. It was 30%, 30%.
It was manufactured, as you said.
Yeah,
that was what it was essentially.
Manufactured narrative, which is what the SNP, which is manufactured narrative is what the SNP excel at, and which unionists in power, Better Together, whatever, perversely refuse to counter with equal and opposite force. And it falls on peripheral figures like Alistair to sort of cut their vegetables for them, do the obvious thing.
Yes, we're talking about cutting vegetables. During 2014, there was a movement among some so-called unionists that the way to ensure that people would vote to maintain the union was to promise to give the SNP and effectively the SNP, but they said promise to give the Scottish Parliament more powers.
Devo Max.
Devo Max, as they called it. Remember Devo Max?
Full fiscal autonomy.
Sorry?
Full fiscal autonomy. Do you remember that?
Full fiscal autonomy. And sometimes they would say FFA. They would even have a wee snappy 3-letter acronym for it.
I'm glad that never happened.
Well, yeah.
Did it?
Although we have got they have kind of moved towards that with the Scottish taxpayer identity now. Each of us is a Scottish taxpayer. We've got our own Scottish taxpayer number as well. Anyway, I saw the danger in that because it's like, well, you're not going to be given this new power to a unionist executive. You're going to be given this new power to the SNP because the SNP are going to be with us for a long time. I could see that.
Yeah.
And so
they will never be satisfied. And it's literally playing into their hand to give them more power in which to wreak more havoc. So it's just, there's no way it can end well. Yeah.
No way it could end well. So in my angst, I actually wrote this here called Devo-Danger. And it was the danger of giving away more powers essentially to a separatist executive. And this was published on the 7th of February 2014, so several months before the even referendum happened. And it's a kind of unionist paraphernalia, I think now. But
what was it called? Is there a name for it? Like the Smith Commission, or is it something?
Well, the Smith Commission, what happened was, which I'll get to in a moment, but if anybody wants that Devo-Danger, it also comes with Dissolving, Not Devolving, which was published after the Smith Commission gave its findings. But we've got the link for that. We'll fire that out on Facebook as well. You can get these pamphlets in our shop. But basically, I warned against the danger of that. And but Gordon Brown especially was big on pushing this. And for some reason, he thought that if we can promise that we're going to give more powers, that will enable us to get in. I mean,
it also makes the union incredibly conditional, as opposed to a fundamental reality of what Britain is. And something, it changes it to being something which is just contingent upon other factors instead of fundamental to the actual fusion of the country as it is.
Yeah, and also it presupposes a reality which only the SNP would have us inhabit, which is Gordon Brown, basically the only person in Scotland who's not a nationalist who thinks like this. He imagines that the Scottish people are so persnickety about the exact configuration of devolution as it was at that moment, that they would base their entire decision, separation versus union, on that. Like, you better give us this specific power because it means everything to us. You better give it to us now, or else.
Yeah, exactly.
The phrase "the wrath of Khan" or whatever.
It was a totally ridiculous idea.
The Scottish person does not exist whose opinion about separation pivots on the details of devolution. That Scottish person doesn't. Well, he does exist. His name is Gordon Brown. But
yes,
Gordon
Brown said he's the only one.
Gordon Brown's function in life is to just accept all of the SNP's premises. But when they finally take you to the brink of separation, he comes out as one of the grand old men of Scottish politics and says, "Don't do it, don't do it. I brought you here, but don't do it. This is serious." It's like, you brought us here, Gordon. You assembled. You're behind building a little castle for the SNP, building Hollywood for the SNP. And
building his own gallows as well.
Yeah, exactly.
But the concessions of the Smith Commission were just a continuation of everything that was wrong with devolution to begin with. Because the thing about devolution is, all the wrong things were devolved from the beginning. So, for example, like I said this last time I was on, Scots never used to complain in the 1980s and the 1990s about education. They complained about deindustrialization and stuff. They had the North British context going on, right? They didn't used to complain about education. It's things like education that were devolved. Not only were these the things that the Scots were happy about before devolution. Scottish education was great in the 80s and 90s. They were happy about it. Scottish direct rule Tory education was actually, the Scots used to brag about their own Tory education. But also that it's like devolution specifically, only, exclusively, selectively devolved exactly the tools that the SNP would need to manufacture division. Education, this, that, the other.
Control over energy, control over planning, so we can't even have nuclear plants because they have to be planned.
At the Smith, thereafter at the Smith Commission, 2015 or whatever, they continue doing the same thing. Now we're going to devolve road signs. We're going to devolve this, all the nation building, psychological nation building tools that you need to make people feel distant.
And trying to have all of the signs be Gaelic, even in areas that have next to no, or at least not for a very, very long time, history of Gaelic speaking, in areas that are majority settled by people of more Germanic extract who were not using that kind of thing.
Whole words were invented for Scottish neighbourhoods that had never had Gaelic names. Like, I think Haymarket is now, the Gaelic word for market of hay. But
it's very weird because you have that, and then I think the new. So it used to be, of course, trying to make Gaelic the national language of Scotland, which was pretty bizarre to me, especially with my background and knowing the history of that, and the differences between Highlands and Lowlands and so forth. But then you also have them jumping on with regards to Scots, and the dialect / language, depending on how you see it, as being the new sort of, this is actually the national language of Scotland. And it gets sort of absurd.
In Edinburgh once, and she was talking about the Scots. She was like this woke American student at Edinburgh University or whatever. She was talking about the Scots as being like an oppressed people because only a tiny how some Native American tribes, only a tiny minority still speak the traditional language. Well, she was saying that about the Scots. She was saying, this is a disgrace. Only 1% of Scots speak their own language and that kind of thing.
Yeah. Which language was she talking about? Was she talking about Gaelic or was she talking about
Gaelic, right?
Okay, yeah. She doesn't know what she's talking about.
English or something like it, part of that patchwork of things we basically call English since 900 AD, thereabouts. I've gone a bit blurry. That's because I'm getting animated. It'll sort itself out.
Yeah.
But returning to that point about the Smith Commission.
Yes.
Just briefly, just ask yourself. I mean, did anyone ask themselves when they're talking about the devolution of one of the requests was the devolution of the British Transport Police? Now, let's just paint a picture. Do you think that there was any significant portion of the Scottish population whose opinion on the devolution of the Scottish Transport Police, of the British Transport Police, was so primal, such a priority that they would split the kingdom in two or not, depending on
literally
that?
nobody. Literally nobody except the SNP
The
MSPs.
SNP urgently demand that you devolve the British Transport Police. They're doing it because they understand the significance of having that uniting, uniting the national consciousness. When I see the British Transport Police in Waverley Station in Edinburgh, I see the union,
in action,
working in action. Yeah, exactly.
A living thing.
Knew that, but they had no equal and opposite. The SNP had no opposite number among the unionists who saw that. In fact, you were the only person.
I'll actually take issue with that, in the sense that the Smith Commission was made up of 2 members of every party. So there's 2 SNP, 2 Greens, 2 Tories, 2 Labour, and 2 Lib Dems, and they all agreed on that devolution of the British Transport Police. So while the SNP and possibly the Greens had a deliberate political agenda to do that, the Lib Dems, the Labour, and the Tories, going back to what you were saying at the very beginning, Ian, just had no clue about nation building or how to hold a nation together or the optics of a nation or anything like that. And they just went along with it. And so, I mean, that's guilty, 10 guilty people, of whom the most guilty were the so-called unionists who allowed so much of the Smith Commission proposals to be taken to Cameron. Cameron, having a pretty low IQ as far as unionism is concerned, all he ended up doing was he turned all of those things, virtually all of them, into what became the Scotland Act 2016, which was the biggest devolution of power to Holyrood in its history, and really just built up the power of the separatist establishment here in Scotland in a major way to our disadvantage. And there was no need for them to even do any of that. We could have had the referendum, and we could have ensured that the SNP had no bouncy bed, no trampoline to jump back into the arena again. But they were given all of that, and it was just a huge amount of stuff that they could then complain about, because, of course, too much is never enough. So they got everything. They didn't get the British Transport Police because that required them to get the approval of the police and all the kind of law enforcement agencies and things like that. It was considered best that it continued in its present form. But they came so close to that, and no doubt that's still no doubt in their scope. Sad to say. Look, it's actually we've had a good talked to over 40 minutes. A lot to say here. It might be a good idea to get you guys back sometime, maybe next year, because we can talk about election night, for example. That was a pretty stressful night. Don't know if you've any last comments about how you coped with the election result, Avellina. Where were you when you heard it, and what were your thoughts?
Yeah, so I was very much stressed about the whole thing. I had obviously invested myself to a great extent through, just emotionally, but also interacting with so many people across the pond with it. I've long just felt like I deeply identify with Britain, certainly as somebody from one of the original 13 colonies. I mean, she is my mother. And so it was something that just is naturally like, just seeing your mother committing suicide, essentially, so it was very stressful, and I was listening to bits and pieces of it, but then I was sort of turning it off because I was very concerned about the whole thing. on BBC and this and that, and getting information coming in from different friends and whatnot. But I was very distressed, and I was praying for most of the night that it wasn't, going to go through, and trying to prepare myself in a certain way for the worst. But at the same time, trying to, I guess, and it is kind of, you go through the different stages of grief before a thing even happens, or you're not sure what if a thing is going to happen. I feel like that was happening at the same time. And then, of course, the sort of sigh of relief of what did happen, and the sense of recognition of what Britain as a united entity actually meant to me. What, I think my love for Britain extending to every facet of Britain, that Britain was not Britain if she were not united, if each composite aspect is what made her Britain. And so there was that. I mean, again, it was a very intense experience. I will say, meeting Ian was one of the many good things that came out of the experience, though, because so we met in 2015, the year following, sort of in the aftermath. Now, I think we may have crossed paths even before in 2014, in different ways online, but I think we properly became friended on Facebook in 2015. And then ultimately what happens is that, we were going through, I suppose you might say, the aftermath trauma. So that was partly how our friendship got forged, was the aftermath trauma of the experience. And then ultimately when I made my first trip, so during everything that happened, I had not yet visited Britain in the flesh. So this is something that happened in 2019. Finally, I visited for the first time on a work trip to do a literary conference in Oxford. And so Ian was a volunteer for that. And we hung out for like 10 days during that whole experience, when my dad and I were over there doing that. And then when I came back again to do a follow-up conference in 2023, and again we hung out for that stretch of time. So this is why I periodically will tag Ian in the song from Silly Wizard, the Rambling Rover, and I always say that's our theme song. But from Orkney down to Dover, we'll roam the country over, and together we'll face the world. Because
I very much enjoy experiencing other people, sort of vicariously experiencing other people experience Britain for the first time, and in the final ways, because 2019 there was a more of a positive energy. Yes, and of course Avellina managed to show me parts of Merry England, like Norfolk, which I'd never seen before. Like
exactly. So that
she saw Bishop
that is
drinking ale around the table in, was it Walsingham or whatever?
Yeah. Wait, no. Where was? So I know that. I mean, we went on a number of day trips. So like in brief, so in the Oxford one, we went on day trips to Norfolk, to Walsingham, the Shrine of Our Lady of Walsingham. And this was a medieval shrine where Our Lady was said to have appeared to a woman who founded the shrine. It was called England's Nazareth. In the Middle Ages, it was a very important location. So we went there. We also went to Nottingham and took pictures with Nottingham Castle and the Robin Hood statue. And then on the second trip, we did day trips out to Ely Cathedral. We finally made it to London. We did our London walking tour. Ian took us on the walking route through parts of London, as only he can.
Ian's the man. If you want to see London, he's definitely one of them. One of the
he gave me the if you tire of London, you tire of life quote. So he lives by that. And then we went
tired slightly of London. Other than that.
Well, we went to, where was the other bit that we went to? We went to Blenheim Palace. in Oxfordshire. So
Oh,
the
wow.
Duke of Marlborough, where the Duke of Marlborough is laid to rest. And then we also went to Westerham. Oh yes, Westerham, in Kent. So that was the birthplace, the village of General James Wolfe, who's one of my great heroes. So I'll have to do a whole episode on Wolfe at some point.
This wasn't in the Celica. This was in the Yaris. This was in the 1999 Yaris.
Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
I think, am I forgetting anywhere? Ian, remind me if I'm forgetting anywhere we went, or did I just cover it?
You've got it covered. You've got it covered. In fact, you saw an incredible amount very, very quickly.
Yeah, we did. Well, thanks to you, because you were our chauffeur. So,
well, folks, thanks very much for coming on. I know that's been appreciated. A few comments here, just saying thanks. Oksana says thanks, guys. Catherine says great program, thanks. Rebecca gives you a smile, and thanks for giving us your insights. There's a lot to talk about. Of course, we could have been going on for a lot more. I remember the election night very well. I was actually at the count, at the Glasgow count, and just to quickly conclude, I wasn't as stressed as maybe yourself and Ian might have been, because I could see the votes, and I could see how the SNP people were reacting, and the SNP people were full of doom and gloom, even though Glasgow voted slightly to leave.
Yeah.
When you say election, you mean the referendum?
Referendum, sorry, on the 18th of September 2014. I was actually at the count, we got tickets because of who we were, but the SNP people, from the first time the first result came in from Clackmannanshire, they had expected to win Clackmannanshire, and they lost. I think it was 56%. Sorry, it's 54% to 46%. So they lost, and they expected to win that, and that just put a damper on the whole evening for them. So I could see that, and I could hear them speaking to other people, and it just wasn't going the way that they thought. And by the time the Glasgow result came through, even though Glasgow was one of only 2 or 3 areas to vote yes, they weren't happy about it. They were just they had already given up. So from very quickly on, I was not stressed, thankfully.
I was on the Royal Mile.
Oh yeah,
and you could have cut the atmosphere with a knife. There was this there's this warlike atmosphere across Edinburgh, and as I said in the newspapers, I remember quoting the newspapers, and it rang true because I was there at the time. They said, "Everyone just wants it to be over."
Yeah,
everyone just wants it to be over. And it's like there's this evil what George Orwell calls the evil atmosphere of war. He used it to describe Barcelona during the Civil War when he arrived in Barcelona. The evil atmosphere of war. There's conspicuously little violence during the referendum campaign, but there were all the preconditions of violence. Total exception of violence, and it was that kind of atmosphere. It was it's very strange. Like the streets were totally empty because everyone was watching their TV, except there were some nutcases joyriding around in Essex with cars with
time itself felt in some way like it was turning in on itself.
Yes. And there's nutcases chanting in the streets in 2014 going, "Maggie, Maggie, Maggie, out, out, out." And for some reason...
In 2014?
Yeah. These ancestral memories were bubbling up. And of course, all the pubs and stuff were open extra late just because of a bylaw or something.
Right.
In the Royal Mile and all the TVs, people were watching all the TVs. And so I had the same experience as you, but it was just walking from pub to pub, on the night into like 3 a.m. and just watching people.
If I could say something very briefly on the topic of just the idea that, I think that for me, another thing that made the whole thing so intense was, I'm very interested in history. So there was a sense of the figures of history who had poured so much of their life and often deaths, if anybody who's been following my series of biographies, into the Union, because that ultimately is a great part of, a lot of these figures is pouring into bringing together these diverse peoples as countrymen. the idea that somehow and in some way it was doing this sundering would do them and their memories and their spirits, if you will, a dishonor. That was something that was striking to me during the time frame as well.
Well, absolutely, absolutely. That speaks to what many people think is like, our ancestors didn't necessarily fight and die recently anyway to break up our own country. But folks, thank you very much for coming in. I'm going to say goodbye to you both now. We'll have to end it sometime. Ian, it's been a pleasure. We must get you back on, Ian, because you're not on enough. I know you're very busy. I know you have a lot of work, but when we can catch you at times like this, it's good.
Clip
good.
that raven's wings. Clip that raven's wings.
And Avellina, as always, a pleasure, and we'll have you back on next year, no doubt.